If everyone is in debt, who is the creditor? Take a look around. There isn't a single country left in the world without debt. America's debt is at an all-time high, crossing well over $38 trillion. The European Union carries around 14 trillion, and Japan has nearly 9 trillion, whichever way you look at it. Even the world-famous oil-rich Saudis and export powerhouses like Germany and China are up to their necks in debt. But there is a massive anomaly here. If everyone owes someone, who exactly is this money being borrowed from? Who is this mysterious creditor? As a financial historian, my job is to carve out those back rooms where money, power, and history collide. Let me tell you right from the start, nothing is as simple as it looks. Debt isn't just a burden. It is the modern world itself, its invisible scaffolding. Every event we experience, every economic crisis, every boom and bust sits right on top of this skeleton. And if you follow this chain of creditors all the way to the end, you run into a very bizarre truth. The world is absolutely not in debt to anyone else. It owes it to itself. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean everyone gets an equal piece of the pie. Where did this whole thing start? Today, our giant planet is drowning in a massive debt swamp of over $315 trillion, which is roughly 3 times the size of the global economy. To understand how we got here, we need to rewind the tape as far back as possible. Long before credit cards and digital transfers were even a thing, this concept of national debt wasn't born in the skyscrapers of Wall Street, but right on the battlefields we all know. The year is 1694. England is clashing with France, and the king is about to run completely out of gold. What do you think the king did? He immediately knocked on the doors of wealthy merchants. He said, "Give me cash now, and in return, I'll pay you lifetime interest backed by the taxes I'll collect in the future." To move this agreement forward, the Bank of England was established. This was a total revolution, because the state now had the luxury of spending money it hadn't even earned yet. As for the lending merchants, they got their hands on a non-negligible power, the official word of the government. In other words, a promise they could buy, sell, or trade however they pleased. This was absolutely the birth of the government bond. You could call it the first sprouting of today's financial system. France immediately copied this system piece by piece. The Netherlands refined it a bit more, and America embraced this method to finance its War of Independence and its later expansion westward. All of a sudden, national debt stopped being a sign of failure and became a measure of credibility. The more you could borrow, the more powerful you were. Empires used to conquer land to steal and plunder gold. Now they were issuing bonds to extract interest. The battlefields had left their place to corporate balance sheets. Who is at the other end of the rope? Fast forward to recent history, debt has now become the world's most exported product. We already said America owes 38 trillion and Japan owes over 9 trillion. Get ready for this. Total global debt is increasing by a full $1 trillion every 100 days. Can you believe that? Every country is in debt. Every bank is handing out loans. Even you, watching this right now, are actually both a debtor and a creditor at the same time through the taxes you pay, the savings you build, and your pension premiums. So, who is really holding the other end of this rope? Let's start from the very top. America, because its debt doesn't just affect them, it concerns all of us. Nearly half of this $38 trillion is owed to the market, meaning to investors. And do you know who almost two-thirds of these investors are? American banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and America's own central bank, the Fed itself. The remaining one-third, roughly $9 trillion, is held by foreign countries. The leader here is Japan with $1 trillion, followed closely by China with about $800 billion. You always hear it on TV. America owes China. China will bankrupt America. Well, the reality of that situation is only about 2% of the total debt. In other words, America actually owes almost all of its debt to itself. The Treasury issues bonds, banks buy them. The central bank buys those bonds back from the market and prints fresh dollars out of thin air in return. Americans pay taxes. Those paid taxes go to the interest of the bonds, and that interest turns right back around and lands in Americans' retirement accounts. It's a perfect circular mirror. The debt is highly realistic, but when you turn around and look at the creditor, what you see is just a reflection of the system itself. A global game of hot potato. And the funny thing is, this loop isn't unique to America. It's the same everywhere. Japan goes and lends to America. America provides funding to Europe through the IMF. Europe locks developing countries into debt through the World Bank. Then those developing countries take the dollars they earn and accumulate and go dump them right back into Western bonds. This is literally a global game of hot potato, with just one difference. This potato isn't made of potato, it's made of promises. Everyone holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is covered by another promise. Think of it like this. You are at a poker table, and every player has borrowed chips from the person next to them. There is only one rule keeping the game moving forward. Nobody gets up from the table. Of course, there is also that massive power behind the scenes, the markets. Behind every government bond stands a network of hedge funds, humongous pension companies, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks managing trillions of dollars. These are the real bosses of credit. The bosses sitting at this table decide which country gets to borrow cheaply and which one will groan in agony just to survive. The moment they lose confidence in a country, that country's currency turns to trash, governments fall, and giant economies can be ripped to shreds overnight. So, politics might choose who governs, but markets decide who survives. The ultimate name at the top of the system is the central banks. They don't just manage debt, they manufacture it from scratch. Whenever the Fed or the European Central Bank buys a government bond, it creates money out of thin air in return. The liability of one becomes the gain of another. This means there's actually a hidden IOU behind every single piece of cash or dollar in your pocket or bank account. Unfortunately, there can be no such thing as debt-free money. What happens if confidence breaks? For decades, the system has been spinning by focusing on just one thing: confidence. Investors know very well that governments will actually never be able to pay back the principal of that debt. But as long as they trust that they'll pay the interest like clockwork anyway, it keeps functioning. But what if that confidence runs out? We saw this in a past that isn't too far away. Greece, 2010. The country's debt reached an unpayable state, and markets panicked. The IMF And the European Central Bank stepped in, sure, but they practically ruined the country in return. Taxes soared, spending was slashed, and people became unable to find jobs. For an entire generation, that bailout package meant sacrificing their lives. Argentina defaulted on its debts time and time again, declared it couldn't pay, and debt turned into an almost irreversible curse for that country. Sri Lanka. Recently, when they ran out of foreign currency to pay off loans, the country ran out of gas, power was cut, and a political collapse took place. So when the system goes under, those creditors you don't normally see, the IMF, rating agencies, mysterious fund managers, show up out of nowhere and grab you by the throat. But do you know what the interesting part is? Right after the collapse, the exact same logic starts all over again from scratch. Old debts are restructured, brand new credits are opened, and the machine keeps spinning, simply changing names on the balance sheet. Nobody has any intention of paying off debt. Because the bitter truth is this: in the 21st century, debts were not created to be paid off. They exist solely to be rolled over, refinanced. Governments have no workaround to zero out these debts, neither today nor in the distant future. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is official state policy. When any regular person takes out a loan from a bank, they have to pay it back down to the very last penny, right? But governments don't do that. They look at debt like a never-ending Netflix subscription. When the due date of the old debt arrives, they issue a new bond and use the money coming from there to close the old debt. In economics, this is called refinancing. So the real product being sold here isn't the debt itself, it's the interest. The global economy depends on these interest payments like a shark that has to keep swimming just to stay alive. America will never bring its $38 trillion debt down to zero. It will forever close the old with the new debt. Likewise, Japan's debt has crossed 250% of its national income, but it has been rolling this debt over with fine precision for decades. So, are investors stupid? Why do they still give money to these countries? Because they aren't waiting to be paid back. They just want to renew the deal and keep collecting their interest. To them, a U.S. government bond is the most prestigious harbor, the most solid collateral in the world. Banks store it as security. Central banks treat it as cash. The system is built on governments never paying off their debt. Just imagine, what if Washington did something crazy tomorrow and announced it was going to zero out all of its debt? Every single bank and fund in the world would lose the safest asset in their hands. The dollar supply would cut off instantly, markets would be sealed shut, and the global economy would go into a massive meltdown. So, paying off the debt actually means executing the system. That's why governments do the exact opposite. Not recklessly, but with a disciplined movement. They acquire more debt. Debt has become the heartbeat of capitalism. Because of this, don't really care when politicians come out during election season saying, "We will balance the budget, we will pay off the debts," because they are selling you a dream. The goal isn't to end debt, it's to keep it payable, sustainable, and still attractive for investors. Because if that thing ends once, numbers lose all meaning. Confidence sinks, interest rates fly, and everything goes upside down. This is the big secret of sovereign debts. The plan was never to pay the money back. The plan was to make everyone believe that the money would be paid. This is actually a massive game of confidence. The direction of money is always to the top. In reality, the receipt for this confidence game isn't cut equally for everyone. We said, we owe it to ourselves. But the truth of the matter isn't exactly like that. Those massive interest payments aren't shared equally within society. The money collected from regular workers and taxpayers flows with upward momentum toward those big institutions and large investors at the top. In other words, debt isn't just something spun between countries. It's a mechanism that transfers money to the top between classes. It is inevitable for the gap between the rich and the poor to grow as the amount of global debt rises. The system enriches the one who maintains the debt in their hands, while it mows down the segment that only pays for it with their taxes. What goes for the household budget goes for the state's budget too. Here, lenders are not purely evil, and borrowers are not innocent victims. They are two peas in the same pod. The real issue is what happens when this engine runs out of fuel, meaning when new borrowings can't keep pace with the speed of promises made in the past. That day, the question, who is the creditor, will stop being an economics question and turn into a heartbreaking personal question. Because there isn't a single culprit to blame at the top of this pyramid. It's not just China, not just Wall Street, and not the IMF. It is actually all of us. The modern system turned debt into money. States print it, banks multiply it, investors process it, and we live bound to it. It has become very difficult to distinguish who the debtor is and who the creditor is. Debt used to mean slavery. Today it means balance itself. But if that balance ever slips one day, that's when the illusion ends and we remember the real face of debt. A promise that cannot be kept forever. If what I've told you here made you look at the world through a different lens, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. History has an answer for everything. I'm just showing you where to look.